Now moving on to Freya Co, which is the next section B question. We're back to the test reach platform. Let's take a look through at our requirements. This one we need to rank the products in order. That's going to require us to do some workings. Calculation will require some workings. Which decision would most likely result in the biggest improvement? We're going to have to know some information, particularly what a bottleneck resource would be. This refers to things in the question, so we're probably going to need to read the narrative for there. Which of the statements about throughput accounting is not true? This looks like my outlier. Option 1, the optimum production of the bottleneck activity determines the production schedule of the non-bottleneck activities. This is true. We don't dedicate resource to the non-bottleneck activities such that we create inventory or work in progress. We use the bottleneck activity, the limitations of that, in order to drive what's going through the other non-bottleneck activities. Second option, it concentrates on the long term when the business has a fixed supply of resources and operating expenses are largely fixed. That's not true. Throughput accounting looks more for short term because once we resolve one bottleneck, then another one is formed and then we look at that one. So this one is not true. The others must be true. Improving productivity on the bottleneck resource will lead to an improvement of the throughput accounting ratio. That will occur, so the bottleneck is where the limitation is occurring. If we improve productivity there, then the overall throughput improves based on the next bottleneck in the system. Conversion costs are considered fixed and included in other factory costs. Conversion costs are everything except materials, and that's exactly true. That's one of the elements of throughput accounting. So we found our outlier. So let's work through the rest. We need to find, using throughput accounting principles, what's the rank of the products in order they should be produced and sold. Once again, I'm going to need to use my scratch pad to do some workings. Freya Co is an automotive company that manufactures wiring harnesses which are bundled or prepared cables. The main customer is a large automobile manufacturer and the industry is mature and highly competitive. Demand exceeds capacity of Freya and they hold little inventory, and the workforce is on guaranteed hourly contracts. The factory is organised into identical production lines, and all products pass through 4 manual stages listed below. We've got cutting and stripping, soldering, taping and fastening, preparation for transport. Production times are shown in partial hours, i.e. 0.3 is 30% of an hour. So we've got the 4 stages that X goes through, and then Y, and then Z. Product prices, costs, contributions are below. Once again for X, Y, Z, we've got price, direct materials, direct labour, contribution. We've got a throughput accounting question, so direct materials are the only variable cost we take into account for throughput. Annual factory overheads are 1.74 million, not including direct labour, and there are 2,900 labour hours available per week. Factories open 50 weeks a year and total labour cost is 1.16. It's probable the examiner separates those out because a lot of people mistakenly think that labour forms part of the variable cost, which normally it does, but with throughput accounting we assume it's a fixed cost. And there's a hint up here that they're on guaranteed hourly contracts. We're not given the throughput accounting ratio in the formula sheet. I haven't shown the formula sheet yet in this paper. We're given this regression analysis, the learning curve and the demand curve. That's all we're given. And the way we calculate this is we take the throughput contribution per hour, and that's per hour of bottleneck resource. And we divide that by the factory costs per hour. But because we need to rank these, we actually don't need to do the full calculation for each. And the reason is the throughput contribution per hour is going to be different for X, Y, and Z, but the factory costs will be the same. If we've got three numbers and we divide them all by the same, then although the throughput accounting ratio changes, they'll still be ranked in the same order. So we can just focus our calculation on the top bit there. So I need to calculate the throughput contribution per hour. So we start with the price, which is $28.50. 20 for Y, and 23.75 for Z. Then direct materials, 14.10 there, 12.50 and 11. And then I get the throughput contribution, which is taking the 28.50 and subtracting 14.10. That's 14.40. This one's 7.50. This one's 12.75. Now we need our time on the bottleneck. Just give myself a bit more space just to make it a bit neater. So which is our bottleneck resource? It hasn't actually told us anywhere in the question what the bottleneck resource is. We have to go and work that out. How do we work it out? And it comes from this line here. We're told there are identical production lines. Well, if there are identical production lines, that would suggest that a quarter of the time is spent on each. And if I look at the total time taken for each production line, I can see that soldering definitely takes more time than the others. I don't need to do the addition, I can just see it's bigger for every product. So soldering must be the bottleneck. Imagine a fair number of candidates got stuck at that point. And now we need the throughput contribution per hour. I'm going to need my calculator for this bit. So I'm doing the 1440 divided by the 0.45. So this is 32. Next is the 750 divided by 0.4, 1875. And then finally the 1275 divided by the 0.38 is the 33.55. And then we'd rank them, with the highest rank being the one that gives the highest throughput contribution per hour. So Z is first, Y is last, and X is second. Next we're asked to assume the throughput per hour for product X is 32. Calculate the throughput accounting ratio to the nearest one decimal place. Although I wrote this out for question 20, we're going to use this formula in this question. We need the throughput contribution per hour. We're told that that's 32. We need to divide by the overall factory cost per hour. So let's work that out first. What are the other factory costs? We've got the 1.74 million overheads, and we've got the 1.16 million labour costs. That's 1.74 plus 1.16 gives me 2.9 million. And next I need the hours. I've got 2,900 hours available a week, and that's 50 weeks of the year. Gives me 145,000. Thousands here, I'm working in thousands and millions there, so I'm going to be careful, make sure I don't make a mistake. Gives me 20. So then I go back, the throughput accounting ratio is the figure they've given me, the 32 up the top, divided by 20. Is 1.6. And we were asked for 1 decimal place. So next, which decision would most likely result in the biggest improvement in throughput? Freya's decided to reallocate the workforce between production stages to improve throughput. Given that soldering is the bottleneck, as we saw earlier, the only area that could benefit from additional resource in terms of workforce hours is soldering, because if we move them to anywhere else, it's not going to impact throughput. Throughput will only improve if we focus on the bottleneck. Reallocate taping and fastening workers to cutting and stripping? No. Reallocate transport preparation workers to soldering? Yes. Reallocate soldering to cutting and taping? No. Reallocate soldering workers to transport prep? No. Those last 2 questions together were quite a good example of why we should look at a section B question in its entirety. There's 5 parts to the question, each worth 2 marks. There's 10 marks. We have about 18 minutes to look at a whole section B question. That last one was very quick, probably less than a minute. The one before was probably closer to 3, but combined on average, it probably works out about right. That's why I'm a big fan of finding the outlier, because that's normally a quicker one to get as well. On to question 24. If both the hourly wage rate and the direct material cost are expected to be higher than the original estimates, what would be the impact on the following? We need to decide, will each of these increase or decrease the throughput contribution per hour, of a factory cost per hour, and the throughput accounting ratio? We've got the 3 elements here when I've done question 20, throughput accounting ratio, throughput contribution per hour, and other factory costs per hour. So we just need to work out where these 2 changes impact on each of these. So the hourly wage rate, so all wages are in the overall factory costs. And if it's going to be higher than original, that means this part will go up. If that goes up, then we've got an increase there. Direct material costs. Direct material costs sit in this top part. And we do the price minus the materials to get the throughput contribution. So if materials have gone up, then that's like this number going up, which means our throughput contribution goes down. Throughput contribution per hour has gone down. And then when we're doing a calculation and we've got a numerator that goes down, a denominator that goes up, then the end result must go down too. Another way you could have done that, if you weren't happy working like this, is plug in some very simple figures and do a little side calculation just to help you get to the answer. That would take a bit longer, but it's one way to do it if you struggle to think about how the mathematical rules apply just looking at an equation like that. And that's question 25. Just going to check the navigator. I've done all of the questions. And that's the end of this section B question. Thanks very much.